Hello, I'm Amy Anderson, and I am joined today by Clint Herrema of Bridge Commercial Realty. Clint, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Amy. This is great.
Yeah, so Clint is the managing partner of Bridge Commercial Realty, and his focus and his firm's focus is on specifically healthcare real estate and working with physicians and dentists on identifying and resolving their their real estate needs. And Clint, I'd love to just dive in and ask you, why should a physician work specifically with a healthcare realtor and not just any general commercial broker?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a very common question we get. So a very fair question. What sets us apart is what you're getting at. Why use somebody who's a specialist? And you've heard me say it before. Why not use an internist to do my plastic surgery? So we use specialists. They know the industry. They know the ins and outs. This is something we spend all of our time in. We understand the market. A healthcare real estate broker understands how to not waste a surgeon's time in research, where they're going to want to be, patient needs, staff needs. Is it an OBL? I mean, what's going on in the practice? What's their target? Neighbors that they want to be near, other specialties. And then not only that, but negotiation strategies. How do landlords view surgeons, different plastic surgeons, other specialty types, our blue chip tenants? And how do you negotiate with a blue chip tenant without killing a deal? Because you want to find that gray area, push it to the limit, but how do you maximize the value of that tenant if you're negotiating, or even if it's a sale? So there are things we know to look for on whether it's land, ground up, or property purchases as well, that we're just not going to waste the surgeon's time and looking at things that a broker should know what to look for.
Okay. That makes sense. I love the analogy of you wouldn't go to an internist for your plastic surgery. We totally get that. That resonates. So we want to work with the specialists who are laser focused on a certain niche. So Clint, we have a lot of plastic surgeons starting practices. Obviously, one of the very first considerations is, where are they going to practice? What kind of office are they going to be in? And one of the biggest myths I hear is that leasing an office is a waste of time, a waste of money, and that these physicians should really always be looking to purchase real estate. I know that's something we've worked together on. You have helped countless physicians navigate the lease versus purchase scenario. Can you walk us through that?
100%. Yeah, that's very common as well. So great question again. So yes, it makes sense to own. Own your own home instead of leasing a home, right? Or own your practice where you're at versus leasing. All of that makes sense. When it comes to business, at the end of the day, it's about cash flow and risk. And even if you're buying a practice or you're doing a startup, the bank is going to say, look, get your feet under you first, get established, get the marketing. Leasing is a number one way to go when you're doing a startup. And the reason is you leverage the landlord's dollars. Okay. So if you look at some of the larger private equity firms, they lease. And the reason is, from a banking standpoint, leases are not considered debt service. It doesn't factor in on the debt to income ratio. So therefore, you can leverage your buying power or your lending power into the practice, working capital, marketing dollars, get established. Don't squeeze yourself day one. You don't need to choke yourself out. Get your feet under you. When you're ready, get that savings, get your nest egg built up, get your patient base built up. Then yes, let's go to the market. Let's buy. Let's look at what we can do. Now, having said that, there's a lot of times, knowing that this is definitely the majority of surgeons out there would like to own. And knowing that a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times we can negotiate buy-in or purchase options in a lease. It does happen. Major metropolis markets, it's tougher. Depends on the market that you're in. But a lot of times that's something we can even look into and negotiate, whether buying into the real estate, into the LLC, or buying the suite of what you're leasing. It does happen. We do try to accomplish that, not always, but you don't want to get overly focused on the real estate. The practice takes precedence when you're getting started.
Well, I think that's good advice. I think that makes a lot of sense with the cash flow and keeping your debt ratio low, because there's plenty of other things that are going to require that money. And if we're looking at laser purchases and other really expensive items, we need that working capital, and we need, the loan capability to make those purchases. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the scenario where a young physician is considering purchasing a practice from a more senior physician, and that purchase would include acquiring a lease space. How do you navigate that decision?
Okay. So there's two scenarios. So either the physician that they're acquiring the practice from is in a lease, or they own the real estate and they're going to lease back to the buying physician.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me just clarify that real quick. So in the scenario you're running, does the physician own the lease, or is it a landlord where the current physician is leasing?
Let's say there's a landlord. The current physician is leasing from a landlord, and the young physician would be acquiring that lease. Okay.
So in that scenario, unbelievable. There's a lot of times there's opportunity, not always. I just looked at for a doctor this week, buying a practice. The selling doctor leases his space. And he said, "What do you think?" And he had 3 different options. I looked at them. So in that scenario, I said, "You got a great lease. Fantastic. It's below market. Great options. Don't mess with it." But that is definitely not the majority of the situations. Most of the time we look at a lease and the doctor who's selling the practice has been there for a while. So the lease has been escalating over time. What happens is year after year, it's been escalating 3%, 2%, whatever, CPI every year. Well, by the time the doctor sells the practice, that lease could be way out of market. And so I had a physician buy a practice. He was working with a practice broker. Practice broker called me up and said, "Can you help me? The practice purchasing price, it's pretty high. And if we can't adjust the real estate price, this deal's dead. Doesn't cash flow." So I looked at the case, and sure enough, we found that he was a bit out of market. The term on the lease, I went to the landlord and I said, "Look," and the attorneys had already tried negotiating, and neither buying and selling attorney couldn't get anything done with the landlord. Went to the landlord, postured our buying doctor to have options in the market, and I got other landlords to compete for their business. Took those competitive offers to this. Said, "Look, you're out of market. This tenant, this buyer wants to stay. We can't justify it. If you can help us get back to a market rate and include tenant improvement dollars to paint, carpet, do some cosmetics in the space, they're not going to stay." We got the landlord to negotiate over $180,000.
Wow. That's incredible.
The practice broker was excited, called back. "Don't know what you did, but we got to close the deal." And so those scenarios, you never know what you're in for. We never know until we get into it. But a lot of times it actually will be better for the doctor to negotiate a new lease instead of assigning the current lease from the sector.
Okay.
Huge. That's a major, major tip on buying practices with a lease. Okay. A lot of times move the needle quite a bit on a new lease.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's great to know. And interesting to hear that even after 2 attorneys couldn't move the mark. But it makes sense. The landlord doesn't really want to lose the tenant, and nobody wins if they move out. So that was brilliant.
Presentation's everything.
So let's take that same scenario, but let's say that the senior physician does own the real estate. But this time he wants to sell it. He or she wants to sell the real estate and the practice, that's a big thing to take on for a young surgeon. How would you help that physician navigate the decision whether or not to purchase the real estate along with the practice? And what are some of the options that are typically available there?
Yep. Okay. So now I have to ask another clarifier.
Yeah.
Did the seller call me or did the buyer call me?
Oh, good one. That's right, because you can work with both parties. I'm working with the young surgeons who are looking to buy, so we're going to go from the buyer side.
Fantastic. So in this episode, I'm going to pull the curtain back for you and show the doctors how this works, and from the buyer side, from the seller side.
Okay.
There is subjectivity. I apologize.
Mama.
All right. So, Amy, I need to ask you a clarifier. Is it the buying physician who's hired me, or is it the selling physician who's hired me?
Oh, good point. Good question. Let's take it from the viewpoint of the buyer.
Okay. And the reason is, in this podcast, we're going to pull the curtain back. We want to show the physicians kind of what happens from the buyer side, from the seller side, how these negotiations work.
Okay.
And so you said the buyer, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So if I get a call from a buyer on a practice, Clint, I'm looking at a practice, looking at buying it, the real estate, I just don't know. I've been evaluating the practice. I like it. Numbers work. What do I do? The doctor is wanting to lease back the space, but doctor also is open to selling, leasing. We get all the scenarios. So I'm going to cover both.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the banks don't want you to buy the real estate out of the gate. They want you to just buy the practice, want you to wait at least a year before buying the real estate.
Okay.
9 times out of 10, that's what they want. Now, if somebody is strong enough, we do run in scenarios. They're already set up. They're liquid enough. They can handle practice and real estate. A lot of times, a significant other or somebody, that partner has the capability. But let's say in the scenario, kind of the traditional, buying the practice first, and they're saying, look, I'm going to lease for a short period and then I want to buy value. So when it comes to real estate values in a transition, the appraisal term is called going concern. The going concern. That's an appraisal terminology.
Okay.
So in other words, it means you're buying a business. The building doesn't need to go through any renovations, so it has the internal build out into value that's significant to the buyer, apart from anybody else in the market. If an insurer buys that real estate, does not have the same value as it does to the surgeon buying. So two parties, these transactions are the most emotional of all real estate transactions we could deal with. Hands down. These are extremely emotional. The seller has a lot of sentimental value. Their blood, sweat, tears into this practice. They've built it out. They've spent exorbitant money to have the build out, have it the way they want. They don't want to lose that value. Okay. They see the value. The buyer's coming in and saying, hey, I get it. I'm willing to pay a premium for this space, but I don't want to be taken advantage of. Not want to be ripped off either. And so they're saying, am I being charged? What if I just lease and move next door? Is this a good deal or a bad deal?
Right.
And the seller's saying, I don't want to lose value. I want to help the buyer, but I don't want to lose either, because now this is it. I'm going into retirement. This is it.
Right.
And a lot of times that real estate value is very significant in a transition. So there is subjectivity. So let's say the buyer reaches out, Clint, what do I do? So what we do is we evaluate the real estate in three methods. There's 3 metrics. So what we educate, regardless of who calls us, we educate the buyer or the seller exactly the same. Okay. Here are the comps in the market of the comparable properties. So if this buyer doesn't buy this real estate, here are the other options they could buy. But it's not that simple. We have to add an adjusted factor for the build out value. So if you buy this real estate, okay, but now you got to do the build out on top of it. Brand new build out, buy the building. So we have to compare that, right? So we run our columns, run our lines on that. If you're going to lease, what are the lease rates in the market? Okay, here's all the lease rates in the market against the lease rate that the seller is proposing. And we say, okay, where do you sit in the market? And don't forget, if you go somewhere else, you have to still do your build out also. Now, the seller, you don't want the seller to take advantage of that and just crank up the lease rate, or it doesn't even cash flow.
Right.
Purchase price, absorb it to a point where it'll never appraise. So we work with the comps first, replacement value. So, okay, if you built this building, less the depreciation.
Okay.
So you factor in depreciation. And then thirdly, okay, what if you just leased a long-term lease, signed a 10-year lease with the seller of the practice, and the seller said, I'm going to sell the real estate to an investor who just buys the lease.
Okay.
That's called realization report. So we show what that value is to an investor. So we take all metrics, we average them out, we show them, we balance it out to the market, because you can't just get so out of whack that it doesn't appraise again. So what we identify, there's a margin. What is the highest value that will still appraise for a bank's? And what's the lowest value in the market to where, look, if it's below this price, they're giving it away. So there's a margin. There's always a window of subjectivity. So if the buyer calls me, we say, okay, buyer, here's the report. Here's the data. Here's where we believe the price is. Here's the high price end. Here's the low end. It might be a $75,000 spread. We try to keep it narrowed within that range. The maximum I've seen is about $100,000 spread, high, low, where we see that of reality. Say, okay, now, whatever, I don't know the deal you're getting on the practice, but now, buyer, what do we want to propose to the seller? Or show them how it's comparing to the seller's number. Okay. So there are times the seller hired Uncle Joey or cousin Ed, whoever, brokerage, and they're just shooting from the hip, and their number is way out of whack. So we have at times had to go to the seller and say, hey, here's what we found in the market. Either if your price is so high, you're encouraging this buyer to not even buy, but just to move next door. On the other side, if the seller's given a great deal, a steal of a deal, we'll show the buyer and say, hey, peace of mind.
Yeah.
Peace of mind. You're getting a screaming deal. Don't mess it up. Okay. So very, very valuable, because now and now you say, hey, let's work with this. On the flip side, if the seller calls us, we show the seller. If you go above this, we can no longer justify this price higher for it to appraise for a buyer's appraiser from the bank. If you go below this number, you're very gratuitous. Okay. So high and a low. And then we say seller. So we never pick the price, whether it's for the buyer or the seller. We educate the range. And then we say, okay, seller, buyer, what do you want to propose? This range is range of reality. And the seller, a lot of times, believe it or not, most of the time, sellers do not ask for the highest dollar amount. A lot of times they'll ask for the middle, even on the low end, because they want to see the deal get done. Yeah. Now I'll give you, I'm going to give a trick to leasing.
Okay.
You're a seller or a buyer. This is a trick on leasing. So if you're a buyer and you're saying, I don't need to own the real estate, I'm happy with a lease.
Yeah.
Or if you're a seller and you've got somebody and they've made it pretty clear they don't really want to own, but you say, hey, tell you what, or maybe they do want to own, get the deal done. We want to get the deal done. So these are the tricks that the attorneys do not negotiate economic points. They negotiate legal points. We negotiate, our focus is economic, about the. One of the best tricks to getting a practice transition done and completed is, first of all, you can't be greedy. but you don't have to give anything away. So what we do is we've been doing, and it's been very effective lately all over the country, is, okay, we identify our values, identify our purchase price, everybody's happy. And then we say, okay, seller, if you give, or buyer, propose this to the seller, either way works. The first 2 years, go way below market rate on the lease. Give me a deal so that I can put money into the buyer can put money into the marketing, all this, maybe processes, systems that they're going to change. You know, they're going to have a lot of capital on the front end, getting for them and just getting up and rolling. So maybe year 1, you give a really good deal. And then maybe year 2, you step it up a little, and then it buoyancies back to a market rate, the rate that we've deemed appropriate. Well, what that does is and you can even say, hey, I'll give you a purchase option, and you can buy the practice for the first 2 years at this agreed upon price. If you do not buy the first 2 years at the agreed upon price, okay, the seller reserves the right to sell it to a third party. Protects the seller, but you're protecting the buyer to say, get your feet under. If you want it, it's yours. We've agreed to terms. So we'll do a 12-year lease with the right to purchase to the buyer.
Okay.
Now the seller's protected. They have the warm fuzzies. They feel, okay, my value's preserved. If something goes wrong, they don't buy. Okay, I still hold my value. The buyer's saying they've given me a 2-year window to buy.
Right.
I'm getting a better than market rate anywhere I could get deal. It's really low. I'm going to get up, I'm going to get established, and I'm going to buy this thing within 2 years. And if, you know, so those are some of the things that we see really help the buyer feel treated fairly. The seller preserves their value, and everybody's winning. So it's been very effective.
That's a great scenario. I love that, because both sides win in that situation, which is what we're always looking for, right? We want it to be a winning situation for everybody. Nobody should walk away from a real estate deal feeling like they got screwed over. And especially in our world where it's physicians on both sides in this scenario, of course, we want it to be good for everyone. So I love that idea. I think it's creative, and it's not one that I'm hearing from too many other brokers out there. So I appreciate that you're bringing that option to the table.
The number one mistake, I'm going to write an article. I actually started it. Just was thinking is like the number one mistake in a practice transition is signing a 5-year lease.
Oh,
It is the most common thing that happens with practice brokers. Attorneys encourage it. Oh, just do a 5-year lease. Sellers they have lost hundreds of thousands in value. The buyer, it can get very emotional, but it's actually, that's a thing for another time. But just doing a simple 5-year lease, it's not always the best option in a lease.
okay. Good to know. Okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit. In this past year, I've helped 6 different surgeons in various states start practices. And the pattern I'm seeing is over and over again, the real estate piece is the rate limiting factor for how soon they can get the practice open. When they come to me and they say, Amy, I'm ready to start. How soon can you get me up and running? I mean, the answer is always, it depends. I can get the practice going in about 3 months. I would say 3 months is aggressive. It's possible. 3 to 6 is more comfortable, but that's all aside from real estate. So how much time would you tell a physician to plan for when they're just entering the market looking for new office space?
Great question. A lot of times we say 8 to 9 months for the real estate. Okay. Here's why. So we do at times, we found some pretty close to turnkey spaces, just needing minor cosmetics. That's the needle in the haystack.
Right.
So the way a real estate and commercial real estate is different than residential. I mean, there's a lot involved. So you have the research. Okay. Then you have the negotiation before, let's use a lease. Before you get to a lease, even if it's a sale on a building, but you've got at least a good month, easy, identifying the location you want and negotiating the terms. Okay. In commercial real estate brokers are not necessarily always the fastest to communicate. Sometimes when we're doing research, it can take us 2 weeks before we get the responses we've been requesting.
Wow.
So it's just the way the market is. Those are some of the obstacles we have to deal with. And when we're reaching out to properties for sale, for lease. And then you're negotiating through the terms. And then we're posturing and leveraging. So we get our options on the table, we negotiate the terms, then it goes to legal. So there's 2 rounds of negotiation: economic, then so you get the economics negotiated through. And a lot of times, we're getting $50 a square foot. I've gotten some clients turnkey spaces, but regardless, those are all negotiating points. Each owner is different, landlord, landlady. So then we hand that to the attorneys. Now it's the landlord's attorney and our doctor's attorney that will hammer out the details of the lease based on the terms that were agreed to in the letter of intent. And that can take, it really depends on the attorneys involved. That can either be completed, I've seen as fast as 2 weeks, to I've seen it take 2 months.
Wow.
And take some time.
Yeah.
And once that's completed and the lease is executed, yes, then we can get to work. Now, during that lease negotiation with the attorneys, you have the builder, you have the designer, the architect. You're getting, we're starting to review approvals, township verbally, and getting things in line so that we can do the construction once the lease is executed. So, and then the construction component kicks in after the lease execution. So research, negotiation, lease negotiation, now construction.
Okay.
Construction, we're doing better, but construction is typically, we see anywhere from 4 months, can be as long as 6 months. Depends on, and a lot of that is the decision-making process. How decisive is the doctor? The designer, who's involved, is and we do not recommend anybody unless we know they have medical experience, they know the specialty. But we have had some builders that come in and they just don't know, or they're a friend of somebody, and it could take a little bit longer at times.
Okay. Well, so you bring up a great point, and just in the timeline, I appreciate you kind of talking through the order of those things. So if I'm a doctor, I'm looking at a space, I know obviously I'm going to need some renovations. I can bring in a designer before I have a signed lease. I can bring somebody in to look, because from a budgeting standpoint, right, we need to kind of anticipate what it's going to cost, how much time it's going to take, so that we can continue making the rest of our plans. So that is appropriate and even expected before the lease is signed.
Yeah. So what I like to do before, as I'm negotiating, once the doctor says, okay, this is my top option, top 2 options, we try to get a builder in right away. If they have somebody in mind, or if they're saying, no, I'm open, we get somebody in right away to give us a high level cost, right? So because I'm use that to negotiate with the landlord the build out. Then that builder's involved, yes, all the way through. So now once the lease is negotiated, that builder is working on drawings, construction document, designing, all those components are happening, because it keeps the process moving so that once it's executed, there's no delay between. And
I know this might be a little bit outside of your scope to ask this question, but we would be paying the designer and architect at that point, correct? Even though the lease potentially might not go through, but we're moving forward assuming that it will.
So this is also why you want a healthcare broker.
Okay.
So we pull a lot of free work on the front end from that know us, that we know medical. And because of the repetition and the amount of work that we are doing, a lot of times on the front end, they will give us, and they're saying, hey, look, if we're on the team, we will give you free work because we're going to be your builder. Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we're able to pull a lot of information on the front end for free.
Okay.
Now, start drawing, or you hire an architect and we start working floor plans, yes, then it's going to be some cost. But even then, sometimes we get initial preliminary drawings for free. We can, or we can that. Every deal's a little different.
Yeah.
If the team, and that's why we can help facilitate some of that front end value that otherwise would have costed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Just trying to lay out the timeline for everybody. You mentioned how the attorneys can potentially slow down the deal. And a question I do get periodically is, why do I need an attorney? I have a broker, or it's the hospital that I'm leasing from, or it's this big name landlord. It's just boilerplate. Like, these are some of the things that I hear. I don't want to spend money on an attorney to review it. So what would be your response to that?
This is commercial real estate. It's not a house purchase. You want to. So this is a business transaction. Don't forget sight of that. The landlords, like, if you're negotiating a lease, the landlord, they're your friend. They're going to go golfing with you. They're going to buy you dinner. They want to be your buddy. Well, who's paying for that, really? Yeah. Okay. The tenant.
Yeah.
We had a landlord. We negotiated a deal. It was in Colorado. The doctor swore, "You cannot beat my lease. My landlord is a patient. We're friends." Come to find out, he was extremely out of market, renegotiated the lease, and it was just a mess. So leases are not done on a handshake. Landlords are in the business. It's a business. This is this is how they make a living, and they're professionals. Okay. There's landlord friendly leases and there's tenant friendly leases. The attorneys will meet in the middle and make sure it's not one-sided one way or the other. So there are clauses that if you're not careful, you can overlook. We've had tenants get kicked out of spaces. They thought that they didn't know that the landlord reserved the right to move them. And if they so desired, I've actually helped our clients and where the landlord, I looked at Lisa and I said, "Hey, I have a client who wants this space. And you, landlord, are telling me you reserved the right to move that tenant. So we'd love to come in and take that space." And we've taken space. And so if a bigger tenant comes in, landlord has a national tenant want your space. If you're not protected, you will lose it. My sister-in-law lost her space. She was renting. They thought they were protected. They did not use an attorney. And I told them, and they got a notice. "Hey, we're your lease. We're not renewing you." She thought she had renewal options. No, we reserve the right. We have the option that we don't have to renew your options. Gotcha. And so there are things in there that are landlord friendly, because don't forget, landlords will sell their buildings. Okay. The more landlord friendly the lease, the more marketable that building is in the open market to flip. So they want to fill their buildings up with tenants, and then they'll get the value increase, and then they'll sell it and they'll go buy another property and build that property up and then flip it. So this happens all the time in commercial real estate. So your lease is increasing the value of that real estate. And if they sell, you might trust your current landlord, but do you know the new landlord who's going to buy?
Oh, gosh, that's such an excellent point.
Yeah. So, and you could buy from an institutional landlord. I mean, you don't know. It could be a mom and pop that they don't just own a few places and you're in one of them. But if they sell to an institutional landlord, you're just a number.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Okay. Well, you and I spoke before this. I mean, we could dive so deep into any number of topics, but we want to keep this light and accessible for the young surgeons who are starting practice. I think all of these are really good pieces of advice, and just to get people going in the right direction. If you had one single piece of advice, or the most important piece of advice you would say about real estate to that young surgeon who's considering starting a practice, what would it be?
So the most critical piece, if you're looking, so because this is what I do for a living, right? It's like asking a surgeon, "Hey, I'm going to get this cosmetic procedure done. What would your advice be?" Well, they would say, "Don't watch YouTube." Okay. So mine is going to be like, "Doctor, as much as you say how much it drives you crazy that people call up Dr. Google, I would say for real estate."
Yeah.
But Dr. Google for real estate or broker Google. This is what we do for a living.
Yeah.
There are a lot of little ins and outs in real estate, and that costs the one little nuance be the difference of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so understanding how real estate works, how pro formas work, how to negotiate, how to draw the line when you said, okay, I pushed the letter, the envelope far enough. Hire good, of course, I mean, it seems obvious, I'm going to say this, but hire a good healthcare real estate broker. When you pick a team, trust them. You've got to find the team that you're comfortable with, you feel right with, trust them. And you want somebody who understands both seller side and the tenant side, buyer side, both landlord and the tenant side. Because we've found that by being able, if I'm representing you, young doctor, you're saying, I'm ready. I've been waiting. I've been dreaming of this for 10 years to hang my own shingle. You're going to hang your own shingle. When they call us, I know how to draft a pro forma that landlord is seeing. And I know how to speak in a landlord's language. The advantage is I know what the tenant needs, but I also know what the landlord needs to get the maximum value. So hire a good broker who understands both sides of the equation, understands your practice, and can just really be an asset to your team. So don't be afraid. And don't be afraid. A good broker, there's actually no additional costs. If a young surgeon calls, says, hey, can you do the market research? There's no additional cost. It's like when you buy a home.
Yeah.
The agent actually will share their commissions. It's already factored in.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. I do often ask about, because we believe in total transparency, no surprise bills of any sort. And so understanding how you get compensated. So that is from the seller or the landlord is where your commissions come from.
Right. Always. And it's already factored in. If you don't use a buyer or a tenant representative like myself, a listing agent in commercial real estate keeps both sides of the commission. It's not like residential. They actually will keep it. It's in their contract. So it very much behooves you to use somebody on your side, bring somebody on your side.
Perfect. Well, Clint, so it's always so great talking to you. I learn something every time I pick up the phone and we chat about a scenario. So thank you so much for doing this today. And we will link all of your contact information with the video so that people can find you. Again, Clint Herrema with Bridge Commercial Realty. Thanks so much.
And if I can add, Amy, to that, we have a national network of healthcare brokers across the country. So we do have, please reach out. We can connect you with a good broker in your backyard.
Perfect. Thank you.